Somewhere on the west coast of Ireland, there's a face that doesn't match the postcard. Not the freckled redhead the whole world pictures when it thinks of Ireland. Something older. Jet black hair. Skin so pale it almost glows. And eyes that might be the palest blue, or gray like the Atlantic before a storm, or a deep dark brown. For centuries, people looked at that face and reached for the nearest story to explain it. Spanish sailors, Vikings, Norman knights. Every one of those stories is wrong. And the truth the DNA finally uncovered is older and stranger than any of them, and if that face is your family's face, it changes who you thought you were. They call it the Black Irish. And before we go a single step further, one thing has to be said plainly, because the comment section will say it for me if I don't. In Ireland itself, hardly anyone uses this term. It grew up among the Irish abroad, in America and Australia and beyond. And in modern Ireland today, Black Irish more often refers to Irish people of African descent. What we're talking about here is the old diaspora, meaning the one your grandmother used, dark hair and pale skin in a family that was Irish as far back as anyone could count. That's the mystery we're solving. Where did that darkness come from? And stay to the end, because the answer flips the whole idea of who the original Irish even were. Let's start with the story everyone's heard, so we can bury it properly. The Spanish Armada, 1588. The greatest fleet in the world sails to invade England, gets shattered by storms, and its broken ships flee north around Scotland and Ireland straight into the Atlantic. Dozens wreck on the Irish coast. And the legend says dark-haired, olive-skinned Spanish sailors staggered ashore, married Irish women, and left their looks in the bloodline forever. If your family is dark, the story goes, you've got Armada blood. It's a beautiful story. It's also genetically invisible. We know what happened to those sailors, because it was written down at the time. Around 5,000 Armada men wrecked off the coasts of Ireland and Scotland. They did not settle down and start families. The English garrison in Ireland had standing orders to execute any Spaniard who reached the shore, and they carried them out. In Sligo, on the strand at Streedaw, over 1,000 bodies washed up, and the men who crawled out of the surf alive were mostly killed on the spot, handed to English troops to be hanged, or robbed and murdered before they got a mile inland. A tiny few were smuggled home to Spain. That's the record. A massacre, not a romance. A few dozen scattered survivors cannot move the needle on a national gene pool. Modern DNA studies find no measurable Spanish signal in the Irish population from that event. The math was always the problem, not the romance. And here's the detail that ends the argument completely. The dark hair was already in Ireland. It was there thousands of years before the Armada ever set sail, which means the Spaniards can't be the source of something that predates them by millennia. The Viking theory at least has real evidence behind it. Norse raiders hit Ireland hard from the 9th to the 11th century, founded Dublin, settled Waterford and Limerick, and yes, a measurable share of Irish men carry Scandinavian lineages today. That part is true. But that signal sits in the east, in the towns the Vikings built. Not in Kerry, not in Cork, not in Galway, the western strongholds where the Black Irish look turns up most. And the Normans who came in the 12th century left an even shallower mark, mostly eastern, mostly in a handful of aristocratic surnames. None of these stories reach far enough back. To find the real answer, you have to leave the whole medieval world behind and go down into the bones themselves. Subscribe to Blame Your Ancestors now, before we go into the grave, because what came out of it rewrites the order of who arrived on that island first. She's called the Ballinahaddy woman. She lived near what's now Belfast about 5,200 years ago in the Stone Age, and she was buried in a megalithic tomb where she lay until archaeologists lifted her out. In 2015, a team at Trinity College Dublin sequenced her whole genome, the first ancient Irish genome ever read. And when they reconstructed her, she had black hair, brown eyes, a complexion closer to Southern Europe or the Near East than to any tourism advert for the Emerald Isle. She was not a foreigner. She was one of Ireland's first farmers. Her people raised the great stone tombs, the passage graves, the monuments Ireland puts on its postcards. Newgrange is the work of her people, and her ancestry traces back, ultimately, to the Near East, to the very place farming was invented, carried west across the Mediterranean, up through Iberia, and along the Atlantic coast until it reached the cold green edge of Ireland. So there is a southern connection, an Iberian one. It just isn't a shipwreck 4 centuries ago. It's a migration 5,000 years ago. Dark hair and brown eyes brought to the far western island and rooted there ever since. This is why so many of you get told you look Spanish, or Portuguese, or Italian, or get asked what part of the Mediterranean you're from. The old commenters who point at the Basque Country and northern Spain aren't wrong to feel the connection. It's real. It's just ancient, and it runs through farming villages, not the deck of a galleon. Which turns the whole thing inside out. If the dark Irish are the old Irish, the first farmers, the tomb builders, then where did the other Irish come from? The fair skin, the light eyes, the red hair, the look the whole world calls Irish. They came later. That's the twist. Around 4,000 years ago, in the Bronze Age, a second great wave arrived, and the DNA of 3 men buried on Rathlin Island off the north coast tells their story. They carried the R1BL21 lineage, the paternal signature found in the majority of Irish men alive today. Those bones weren't ancient strangers. They were the direct ancestors of the modern Irish. They also carried the gene for lactase persistence, the ability to drink milk into adulthood, which spread through Ireland until it hit the highest frequency anywhere on Earth. If you're Irish and you can put away cheese and cream and butter your whole life with no trouble, that's a 4,000-year-old inheritance from these men, and half the comment section just nodded, and they carried the variants for lighter skin and lighter eyes. Those spread fast, but the genes for dark hair did not die. They held on. In pockets, in certain lineages, especially in the West, they didn't just survive, they stayed dominant. So read what the DNA actually says. The fair, light-eyed look everyone treats as the definition of Irish is the newer arrival. The dark hair of the so-called Black Irish is the older stock, the first farmers, the people standing on that island 1,000 years before the so-called Celtic look was even assembled. The myth had it perfectly backwards. The dark Irish were never the outsiders. They may be the closest thing Ireland has to a first people. And if that's your family, you don't descend from a lost sailor. You may descend from the very beginning. That's the fathers, the story written in the Y chromosome. But there's a second record, quieter and just as old, and it's carried by the mothers. Now, one thing has to be exactly right here, because it's the single most common correction in this entire topic. Mitochondrial DNA passes from a mother to all of her children, sons and daughters alike, but only her daughters pass it onward. It does not decide your hair color. What it does is act like a timestamp on the maternal line. And in Ireland, that stamp shows astonishing depth. The most common maternal lineage, haplogroup H, has been carried by Irish women for thousands of years. Alongside it, a real minority still carry haplogroup U, one of the most ancient maternal lines in Europe, and a branch of it called U5 reaches all the way back to the hunter-gatherers who walked Ireland's coasts more than 7,000 years ago, before farming, before metal, before anything. Some of you carry that. It's still here. And these maternal lines show their closest matches not always to Britain, but to France, to Iberia, to the whole Atlantic coast. The fingerprints of ancient seafaring families who came to Ireland long before any Viking ship crested the horizon. If you want to actually see the Black Irish face, you go west. Kerry, Cork, Galway. And if that's where your people are from, put the county in the comments right now, because this next part is about you specifically. In 2017, the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, working with the Genealogical Society of Ireland, published the Irish DNA Atlas. They took DNA from people whose great-grandparents were all born within about 50 kilometers of each other, the deepest-rooted families they could find, and what they discovered dismantled the idea that there's one single Irish people. Ireland broke into 10 distinct genetic clusters, 7 of them deeply Gaelic Irish, 3 showing shared Irish-British ancestry, and they lined up with the old provinces and with the very history of who invaded where. The Viking settlements showed up in the genes. The Ulster plantation showed up in the genes. And the oldest, most distinctive clusters of all sat in the west, in exactly the counties where the Black Irish look runs strongest, carrying the least Viking and Norman ancestry of anywhere on the island. The later waves barely touched them. Isolation does a specific thing to a bloodline. Scientists call it the founder effect. Cut a small population off from the outside world for enough generations, and rare traits don't just survive, they concentrate. Black hair beside pale skin and light eyes had exactly the environment it needed in the west of Ireland to become not a rarity, but a defining feature of whole communities. And culture reinforced what geography protected. The West was the last stronghold of the Irish language, of Gaelic music and tradition, of families who married within tight networks across centuries. The traditions held and the bloodlines held in the same places, for the same reasons. Which brings up the thing half of you have been shouting at the screen. The eyes. Because there isn't one Black Irish look, there are two, and both are real. There's the jet black hair with pale skin and light eyes, the blue or the gray or the pale green, the one people call otherworldly. And there's the dark hair with dark brown eyes and skin that tans instead of burns, the one people mistake for Italian or Greek or Middle Eastern. Same label, two faces, and the difference comes down to a genetic tug of war. Pigmentation isn't one switch. It's a contest between the genes pushing for dark coloring, carried down from those Mediterranean farmers, and the variants pushing for light, brought in later. Whoever wins that contest in you decides your eyes, your skin, whether your black hair throws red in the sun. It's why one family in Cork or Mayo can produce a jet black-haired child with ice-pale eyes and, right beside them, a flame-red sibling with green eyes and freckles. Same parents, same ancient gene pool, different rolls of a very old set of dice. So whichever version you are, the light-eyed or the dark-eyed, you're not the exception to the Black Irish. You're one of its two true faces, and it hides in your name. This is the part the old families already know. Irish surnames are records, and a whole set of them carry the darkness right there in the Gaelic. Doyle comes from O'Dubh Gael, the descendant of the Dark Stranger. Duffy, O'Dubhthai, the Dark One. Dowd, O'Dubhda, from a chief remembered as the Dark-Haired. Kearns, the Little Dark Ones. If your surname means dark, black, or swarthy, and a surprising number of Irish names do, then your family was carrying this story in its name for centuries before anyone sequenced a single gene. Say your name in the comments if it means dark. There are more of you than you think. Now, the darkness didn't only get passed down. Sometimes it got concentrated by catastrophe. The Great Famine of the 1840s collapsed Ireland's population from around 8 million to about 4 million in less than a decade, through starvation and the mass exodus of the coffin ships. And I'll say what the record says plainly, because the comments will demand it. This was not a simple failure of the potato. Ireland went on exporting food under armed guard while its people starved. It was a catastrophe of policy as much as blight. When a population is cut in half like that, the DNA of the survivors gets amplified, and in the isolated West, where the oldest traits were already concentrated, the famine acted like a final filter. The families who endured and then boarded those ships carried the ancient bloodline out into the world, into Boston and Liverpool and Sydney, into millions of people who never knew what they were carrying. They carried the health of it too, the whole inheritance, not just the looks. Ireland has the highest rate in the world of a condition called hemochromatosis, the tendency to store too much iron, so common in people of Irish blood that doctors call it the Celtic curse. It's dangerous now, but in a past of famine and poor diet, storing iron may have kept people alive. The same population history that shaped the Black Irish face also gave Ireland the world's highest rates of certain conditions, from that iron disorder to cystic fibrosis. So when someone in the comments says they've got Irish roots and hemochromatosis both, that's not a coincidence. That's the same 4,000-year-old story written into the body instead of the mirror. Pull it all together, and the modern genetic picture is clear. Irish ancestry breaks into three ancient streams, roughly a third from the Western hunter-gatherers who returned after the Ice Age, roughly a third from those early farmers who carried dark hair and brown eyes up the Atlantic from the Mediterranean, and the rest from the steppe herders whose Bronze Age migration reshaped the whole continent. That three-way balance has held remarkably stable for close to 4,000 years, and few places in Europe can claim that kind of continuity. The Vikings marked the East. The Normans marked the aristocracy. The plantation marked Ulster. But the West was never overwritten. The oldest genetic layer survived intact, and the Black Irish face looking back from those Atlantic communities isn't a mystery that needs a shipwreck to explain it. It's simply the oldest face in Ireland, still here after 4,000 years. That face was never foreign, never the leftover of a raid or a wreck or an invasion passing through. It's the most direct living link to the people who raised the stone circles, who survived the Bronze Age, who held their bloodlines together through isolation and famine, and everything history threw at a small island at the edge of the Atlantic. The romantic stories survived only because nobody had read the bones carefully enough to replace them. Now the bones have been read, and what they say is simple. The Black Irish were never mysterious, never outsiders, never the mark left by some foreign hand. They are the original face of Ireland, kept alive in the West by geography and stubbornness and the sheer ruthlessness of survival. The island that gave the world its redheads kept something older underneath the whole time. It was always there. It just took science this long to confirm what the west of Ireland never actually forgot. So tell me where your people are from. The county, the coast, the townland. Drop your surname, especially if it means dark. Tell me if you're the pale-eyed kind or the dark-eyed kind, if there's a redhead and a raven-haired one in the same family, if the black hair went white early and never gray. And if your family always swore it was the Spanish, say that too, because now you know the truth is older and stranger and far more yours than any shipwreck. Subscribe to Blame Your Ancestors. Every week we go deeper into the names and the blood people carry without ever knowing what they survived. The next bloodline's already waiting.